Hello, 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 and welcome, my friends. Welcome to the Little Thieves live discussion. Yes, we are both here, set up with our books. I don't know how close to the line you cut this, but I finished this like Thursday.
Oh yeah, I finished it this morning.
Oh, hey, listen, it's a
I had a
reread
great
for
time
both of us.
though.
It's a good way
Yep.
to start your Saturday, though, right?
Oh, honestly, yes, especially when it comes to just like getting the justice that certain people deserve and all of that. It was a great start to my morning.
Beautiful, beautiful. I just before we get into things, I just want to highlight one comment, and then we'll get to everyone else's comment at some point, just to say hello. But Ella says you couldn't have picked a better day for the live show because I actually had vice versa for lunch. I love this. So,
Me too.
but hello to everyone, really quick. I am real quick. Let's introduce ourselves real fast. Talk about who we are, what our channel is, in case there are people who have not seen us before. I'm Margaret. I'm the Word Nerd. This is my channel, obviously. And I am a big fan of this book. I'm a big fantasy reader. That's kind of my I read a little bit of everything, but I'm a big fantasy reader. And this just is right in my wheelhouse for those reasons. So, and then I am joined by the lovely Leandra.
Hello, everyone. I hope you're having a lovely Saturday. Thanks for joining us and carving out some time to talk about the book. I am Leandra the TBR0. And what's really fun about this is I, oppositely from you, am not really a huge fantasy reader. I do read some
Yeah.
fantasy, but I feel as though this was kind of my beginning of really wanting to keep reading fantasy, getting into it. And I would argue there are probably some elements that are involved in like puzzling and mystery, which is what I come from. So yeah, this is for the fantasy readers, but there is a puzzle.
It's so perfect. Like we just like one of us is a fantasy person, one is the mystery heist person. We didn't plan that. Neither of us realized that until this very moment.
Yeah, exactly. Like this is on the fly. This is not staged. This is just us being like, huh, this is even more perfect than we expected. And so yeah, I think that this is going to be an interesting discussion from like your point of view coming from this, and then mine being just less versed in fantasy and like fantasy world stuff. But so excited.
Yes. Let me hold on. I've got some we got some structure, but only like, to quote Barbarossa, it's more like guidelines. So there are a few points that I'm like, we both want to make sure we hit these points as we talk about this book. But real quick, if you're just joining us, just so you know, we're talking about Little Thieves by Margaret Owen. It is a YA fantasy book. It's a heist novel, and it is a retelling of the Goose Girl. We're following Vanja Schmidt, and she is the servant in the original fairy tale, and she has sort of taken over her mistress's identity and is using it to rob nobles blind. And she ends up stealing from the wrong noble, getting cursed, and then having to deal with the fact that not only is she fighting this curse, but she's also being like tracked down by this junior detective that's like, I'm going to figure out who this Finnegeist is. And it is delightful. If you like, I think this is a great actually gateway fantasy book for people like you were just mentioning, Leandra. Because it is close enough. I feel it has that heist element, which automatically like grabs people. It has some fantasy elements, but they are rooted in like real history. Like it's not a literal historical world, but they are rooted in things that you may recognize if you know anything about German history. And it's so great and character driven. Right?
Oh, yeah, 100%. And even so, yeah, like we're touching upon so many elements or tropes that any type of reader could probably gravitate towards this. As you said, it's like historical fantasy, right? Yep, inspired by historical, like I guess culture and that type of thing. There's found family. I think there's a lot of found family. We've got this kind of Scooby gang of Vanya slowly getting ever closer to these people. So by the end of the novel, like she has her people. She finally feels like she belongs, which is really lovely. And there is also this like romantic subplot. So people who enjoy that. There's a lot of action. There's a magical system. I would say that you can see the rules in this world, especially when we get to the Nachtmaren and like Grimlings and why they exist and how they, I don't know, how their powers work. So I feel as though it's very well plotted, even as you say, it's character driven. The plot all makes sense. It all clicks together where you're like, yes, this all makes sense.
Yes, yes. It like you said, especially, I think this is especially good for people who like historical fiction to get into fantasy. I'm trying to convince Aoife to read this book. Well,
I feel like she'd love it.
She would, especially because it's based in German history. We're going to get into those real quick, but before we do, I just want to let people know a real quick trigger warning for people, because this book does get into quite a few topics that may be hard for people. It's really well done, but we are going to be discussing parental abandonment. We're going to be discussing abuse of minors, especially in regards to authority figures in their lives, potentially. We will also potentially be discussing sexual assault. And let me just make sure I'm not missing anything.
Physical and verbal abuse as well.
Physical and verbal abuse as well. Those are things that I don't know if we will be getting into detail about them, but they may come up during this discussion. I just want to make sure that people are aware of that. But let's see who we have in the chat really quick. We have an Abs. We already knew we had an Ella. Hello. We got Purple Dragon. Tanila's here. Julie. Hello, Kappa Books. Ro and Anne. Oh, thank you very much, Ro. We appreciate it. Now, specifically, hello, Reading Ace. I haven't finished the book yet because life is being ridiculous, but I'm enjoying it so far, and we'll watch the replay of this later. Kappa Books is in the same thing. We're going to have a little bit of a spoiler-free discussion where we won't be getting into any like specific plot details other than probably synopsis stuff. At the beginning. So just so you, in fact, I will put that banner up right now. Boop, right there. We'll have that when we get there. I will switch to a spoilery banner when we do. So, hello, Rachel. How are you today? Rachel is the one that is probably the most frustrated that I took the longest time to read this book.
Oh, no.
She was yelling at me to read it. She's been yelling at everyone to read it. And it took me a while. Vanja Schmidt has never done a sequel. Abs, we're going to get into this. I agree.
Yep. No, she never did anything wrong.
We are part of the Vanja Schmidt Defense Squad because we are. So, not quite done with my reread, but here for your enthusiasm to help me pull out of my sluggish reading mood. Alice says, not a huge fantasy reading. I actually come more from the historical fiction side of things. Yeah. Yes. Perfect. That is still funny to me that like we didn't plan that, but we got a fantasy reader and a mystery person.
Oh yeah, for sure. And like, especially because I do prefer like historical settings. So like historical fantasy, if I'm going to read it, I love alternate history, sci-fi, historical mystery. And so this and honestly, a lot of times I feel like one criticism we can have for a book is that it's trying to cover too much, right? There are so many elements, it's overwhelming and everything ends up being surface level. I don't think we have that issue with Little Thieves. I think that Margaret Owen is able to balance everything and just have it all be like cohesive rather than feeling like she's got to like pick and choose, being like, okay, let's focus on this plot, now I'm going to focus on this one, and you feel like you're not immersed. This is an immersive world. You can, I haven't read her first series, but you can really tell that there was a lot of work put into the different plot threads and making sure they all come together. And I like the fact that like there's nothing that she wastes in this book. No,
absolutely nothing. I can't tell you
every like there are so many actions or symbols that are then reused by the end. Like for instance, like the finding of the lady, that is like a very important theme that goes throughout that we end up seeing in the finale, which we won't discuss just yet. And then also even like her sleight of hand, her ability to like steal, the white penny and the red penny end up being very symbolic by the end. There's so much to uncover here.
The layers in everything that you just like, because there is the surface layer of all of those things, but then there's also how those get used at like continually different layers throughout the plot. Like nothing is as it seems. And I think that's part of what makes for a good heist story. I don't think that this is your stereotypical heist story necessarily. I feel like we get the heist element really quick at the beginning, and then it becomes more of the mystery and solving things. But like, I feel like this does a lot of tropes, but it does them in a way that we're not used to seeing them necessarily. It's coming at them at a slightly different angle and making the trope serve the story versus the story serving the trope.
Right. It complements the story. It adds
Yes.
to the story rather than feeling as though it's just this additional fun side quest or slice of life. Like, honestly, it all seems to be leading like from different directions, as you kind of mentioned, to this one point where they all meet. So even if at one point you're like, okay, there's a lot going on, all of them end up coming together in the very end, which is really fascinating. Also, I would be interested to hear your thoughts on the narrative, I guess, like tone, because we kind of get two tones actually. So we have Vanya's perspective. We have her be our, first person POV throughout the entire book. But then we also, at the beginning of each section, of each act, and then periodically throughout, she finds herself into this fairy tale tone. So rather than being snarky, rather than being cheeky and just the cleverest thief in the room, we have this tonal change, or at least the beginning is always more fairy tale-esque, where it's reserved, it's a bit more distant as she's kind of like removing herself from the story. And I guess that's where we're getting the homage to the Grimm's fairy tale.
Yes. It's interesting about the Grimm's fairy tale. I'm going to remind me to come back to that at some point, okay? Because I want to actually talk about what we're talking about. This is kind of gets into one of the things I want to talk about is like what makes a good retelling, what makes a good reimagining. And I think something that Margaret Owen really does is she's able to have this very opinionated voicey narration style with this character, but also, like you said, have these separate tales that create each section that are told in the style of the fairy tale. And they start as this very fairy tale-esque, like what we're used to from Grimm's fairy tales. And then they kind of, at the very end, we come to the point where like, oh, this is the moral of the story, kids. And it's fine. You're just saying, this is how it applies to my life and what you're about to read. And I like that as a, almost like a foreshadowing technique, right? She's giving us enough information for us to know what we need to pay attention to in the next coming section without spoiling the story, right?
Oh yeah. And it also it still keeps the, I guess, like narrative purity of what the point of a fairy tale is, which is to learn something, some type of moral, and apply it to your own life. And Vanya's like, that's exactly what we're doing. I think that there's a moment where she ends up coming face to face, and we'll keep vague, but she comes face to face with Giselle, who is the original princess, and she says, "You went to sleep listening to this fairy tale when it was my life, and you never ended up pulling from that the deeper meaning and applying it to our relationship. And this is now why we are so fractured in our relationship and understanding of each other." And I'm like, this is what fairy tales were originally for, obviously to really kind of terrify the crap out of everybody. But I love that like Margaret Owen kind of pulls that, and we definitely are supposed to be learning something from this tale for sure.
Yeah. She ties that in with a theme that we are continually hearing from Vanya. Tennille said, "I really like that things get reintroduced, reinforced, and then we move on. 500 pages of all heists would not have been as good." No. And one of the masterful things that Margaret Owen does with this is, like you were saying, one of the consistent themes throughout this book is Vanya not being listened to because of who she is, because she is a servant and she is not anyone that is important. That's a big theme in there's a quote, hold on. There's a quote at the very beginning that is, "The little thief steals gold, but the great one steals kingdoms, and only one goes to the gallows." So much of this story is actually an inversion of the original fairy tale, because the original fairy tale is about the princess. It is about a greedy maid who is uppity, and it basically, the princess is recognized as the princess because she is this perfect blonde-haired, beautiful creature who has no ill will and takes everything very meekly and knows her place. And this, the way that this gets inverted in this story is we're following Vanya, who is the maid in this story, and Margaret Owen goes, well, why is the princess more worthy of this marriage, of this throne, of this crown, of what the princess has than the maid? Why is she more worthy? And I think that's really explored in here. I think that she really does dig deep into those themes. And I think, like, tying that back to retellings, I think it's so interesting when you see retellings, because we've all seen the retellings where it's just like, you didn't think about this very much, did you? Where this is sitting, Margaret Owen actually sat with the material and thought, okay, how do we subvert this idea or subvert this trope? She didn't subvert it just for the sake of subverting it, right?
Mm-hmm.
She subverted it because she had a point.
Yeah, and I do love how that gets addressed, where Vanya is constantly saying, why do you keep arguing that money isn't important? Why do you keep arguing that you deserve this life when you've simply been born into it?
Yep.
And I've been born differently. Why did I deserve this fate in comparison? And even there's definitely a question where Owen has asked, like, well, what made the maid greedy? Like, where did that come from? Because that clearly isn't just, something that was, I guess, like coming out of like left field. Something triggered it. Some events led to her having this like greedy figure as far as like her choosing selfishly. And we get that backstory. We understand how society and others have created Vanya as this morally gray character, which I absolutely really love. I would love to hear how other people feel in the comments and yourself about her moral grayness, because I would argue that she is the true form of what I think moral gray characters should be. We throw that term around a lot, right? We label so many characters, especially like in romances, a morally gray love interest or a morally gray, villain. And for me, I think that what has to make them morally gray is that they feel as though they truly aren't doing anything wrong, that it's society that has bent or morphed their moral compass. That's what it is. They're playing with society that's been given to them, but they're just not inherently evil. Because I get tired of so many characters being deemed morally gray, and I'm like, no, that's just a bad person who's very selective on who they're nice to. I think that Vanya is morally gray in the way that I like morally gray characters to be.
Yeah. So it's so funny because until you mentioned, like, when we were chatting backstage about like Vanya being morally gray, she's not someone that I would have labeled as morally gray. And we'll get into that a little bit when we get into the spoiler section, I think, because I feel like there's a lot that we want to potentially talk about Vanya's actions, but like every action that I guess she does fit the definition, though, because the definition of a morally gray character, at least how I've heard it, is a character who does the wrong thing for the right reason. You guys consistently have heard me say that this is fantasy Batman, Catwoman in like Germany, because Catwoman is not in when you read the comics, Catwoman is not necessarily an anti-hero. She's very much now fully on the side of the heroes, but she does her thieving. She's kind of a Robin Hood character.
Yes, I'm so glad you brought that up, because I was like, she's Robin Hood, but she just keeps it for herself because she is the poor that she's giving it to.
She is very much doing the same thing, and I think we see that's why it so appeals to me, because Catwoman is my favorite DC character. But she is recognizing that society is unjust, and she is not someone who is in, I think we fall into this, especially with YA, this idea that the main character needs to be working to change society. We see this so often with dystopian, where this character, like, why are they in this position where they're suddenly, like, they're the one why are they the Katniss? Why, she knows she's not in a position to actually change anything about society. All she can do is make sure that she survives. And I love that about her. That's part of why, for me, like, yes, she's morally gray, but also at the same time, I'm like, she's not doing anything outside of what the nobles around her are doing. She's just poor. That's the big difference. They are stealing from their, like, knowing what I know about medieval society, and that they are exploiting and stealing from their tenants, from the people that work for them. She's just exploiting them back. It's tit for tat.
Yeah, and then that's where this morally grayness comes from, where she's like, I'm not harming anyone who can't afford to be harmed. I suppose maybe that's where her perspective comes in, where I am just taking enough where I need, and these people's lives will not be changed, arguably, even though she is doing some like emotional harm where she enjoys scaring this
She enjoys
nobility.
scaring them
She's
with her
like, I
planning.
want them to be afraid going to bed and thinking of me. So there is a little bit of vindictiveness, but like, we're here for it, Vanya. Go ahead, eat the rich, you know?
Julie, this is the exact definition of chaotic good in Dungeons and Dragons. Morally gray to me means the character has their own moral compass. They do the right thing according to them. Is that what society says is morally right sometimes? Yeah, chaotic good is doing, well, I guess chaotic good is more like doing the right thing regardless of what the law says.
Mm-hmm.
Tanya probably falls into chaotic neutral.
Yeah.
But we do see her also try to help others in some ways in doing this. Tennille says, I feel like morally gray characters are often labeled when they're bad, selfish people versus this where there's injustice that Vanya is suffering and things are gray. If you're suffering injustice, should you follow the rules and just take it? I think that is oh God, who is it? Oh my God, there's a quote somewhere that says, why should I follow a law that was never made with me in mind? I don't know who said that. I know that it was a Black activist, I believe, that said that in regards specifically to the civil rights movement.
I mean, look at historically, the number of times laws or policies are changed, that suggests that either the previous law was unjust or we're now making it unjust from, just because it's set in law, set in, some type of official government document, it doesn't mean that it is actually just or morally good. It's just that that's the society that you're living in, because that just proves it. Why do we keep having to make new laws? Why do we keep having to change laws or remove that? It's because that isn't, someone said that the law shouldn't be the way that you direct your moral compass, like solely. Like that should not be how you view morality, because we've seen historically that it's not always everyone.
Bad things are quite often legal. Another similar quote is that like ethical and legal are not the same thing. Yeah,
that's a good one.
Abs says Vanya's moral grayness to me comes from the circumstances. She sometimes acknowledges what she is doing is wrong, but it's the only way she believes she can survive. Other times she thinks she fully thinks it's okay. Yes, exactly. I just think they remember being 6 and noticing that we were not well off because other kids had things we didn't, but also notice those kids that were well off were treated as if they were morally better because their clothes were nicer, etc. And that is something that I think is handled so well in this book. The way that Vanya talks about the fact that she is seen as less moral than the rich simply because she is a servant, she's working for other people, her clothes are not as fine. Like there is a lot of examination in this book. This is like class consciousness, the book, because there is a lot of examination of how people's perception of you and your place in class and society is affected. How people's perception of you is affected by your place and your class in society and your fiscal bracket in society, right? Like you are how what she did to Giselle and stealing her identity is seen as more of a crime than some of the other stuff that the rich are doing. Like seen as more of a crime than what happened to Giselle in Giselle's household. Sorry, no, what happened to Vanya in Giselle's household and how that affects things. So.
Yeah, I think this actually acts as a really good segue into our discussions about the characters in general, this character list, and especially as these characters are meeting Vanya, those who meet her with prejudice and those who don't, and how this ends up working. Because not only do we have Vanya, the maid, but we've already mentioned Giselle, the princess, whose identity she takes. Giselle grows quite a bit, semi off page, right? Because we don't really see her very often until the mystery and the sinister elements that are surrounding the Margrave kind of come to the forefront. But we do see growth for her. Ragna is a very fascinating kind of neutral character because she's coming at this perspective as the daughter of Iswald, as a demigod, not really understanding society. So she almost kind of acts as the blank slate, and she's just reacting to how people are treating others. And she's one of the first people to actually defend Vanya, because she's like, from what I'm seeing, you all are the ones who are mistreating Vanya. And I think Ragna acts as a really great staple character for that purpose.
I love that scene. I want to get into that. We are going to I want to discuss one more thing before we get into the spoiler section. We're going to go back to Isvald because like I have things I want to discuss there that are going to get spoilery really quick. There's one other thing I want to mention that's kind of spoiler free, but I want to talk about how nice it was to read a book that's just very casually queer. Right?
Yes.
I think Margaret Owen did such a good job of setting up a world where, like, it's not that homophobia doesn't exist, because we do see characters experience it, but there is discussion just simply of the fact that, like, just throwaway lines like things like trans people existing. There's a discussion of a character needing to marry someone with whom they can create a child, create an heir, and talking about the fact that, like, well, this person, well, I would need to find someone, you know, there definitely are women here that, you know, were not known. It wasn't known that they were women when they were born. So we could definitely work on that. But I want to shout out Margaret Owen for that, and the way that she includes queer characters. She includes a representation that we don't see a lot of, which is demisexuality and you know, kind of asexuality. That's on the ace spectrum. And how nice it is to read, like, just be in a world where queerness exists without having to be justified or any of that. So
yeah, I think it's that most of our characters in this book, their reactions to it when they face it, they just carry on. They're like, okay, and then move forward. No matter what it's like, the sexual orientation, or even when it comes to like Vanya and Emmerich specifically, them as they are trying to like break barriers of, you know, distrust and other things. There are moments where they have to address and be honest with like how they would move forward and their comfort level, whether it's even like pretending as a bit of a kind of like identity to hide their identities, to hide why they're sneaking about a castle or something. There are boundaries as well that they need to understand, and that can be tied with sexual orientation as well. So yeah, I love that too.
Yeah, right at the beginning, one of the nobles casually mentioned that his husband couldn't make it, which was nice right away. Yeah, I love that. This, I think, is where we are going to get into spoilers, just because there are parts of this part of the discussion that I do want to like be able to talk about specific stuff. But so we're here in the spoiler section. If you haven't read the book yet, we will see you when you have. So thank you for joining us, and we'll see you in a little bit. In a couple of weeks. I know there are a bunch of people like they're like, I haven't read it yet. Great, get caught up. Worry about that, and then you can join us. I really appreciated like what her like in specifically in discussion of like how when it was brought up, I think the only time, this is why I wanted to go to spoilers, the only time that we really see any talk about specifically Giselle's queerness not being acknowledged is when it's in discussion with her mother or talking about her mother, and it is less Vanya like the way that Margaret Owen is able to acknowledge that some people still go through that while also making it very clear that Vanya doesn't give a fuck was just so nice. And the fact that like she recognizes like, yeah, some people are weird about this, but it really doesn't, like, obviously it's very clear that these people love each other. Barthel also, I love that, like, she's out, just lets it go, and people feel comfortable talking about it. It's just, if someone's looking for a world where that is happening, this is a very nice place for it to happen.
And I think that Margaret Owen allows for us to like find, like, I think she slips it in, and that's not to like, she's not trying to trick us. She's not being sneaky about it. It's casual, and we end up getting distracted and redirected with other things. Like, for instance, the humor. There's so much humor in this book surrounding relationships as well. Because even like with Barthel, when he says, oh yeah, you know, my partner, I'm married to him, blah, blah, blah. The first reaction is Vanya saying, I'm your best friend. Why didn't you tell me you were married? Like, that's all she addresses is like, I should have known you had a husband.
Speaking of going like callbacks, the funniest part of that is that it's actually a callback to a previous joke, and you know Barthel is just sitting there going, I can't marry your child. I cannot murder this child.
He's like, I'm leaving. He's like, I'm done.
It's so funny. Yeah, it is. That was like, it's it's not, how am I had the wording for this about 30 seconds ago, but it's not like you said, it's not that she's trying to trick us. She just wrote a world where queer people exist. That's not, it's not anything ridiculous, like remarkable. It's not anything that is going to cause a fuss or get a lot of pushback. It's just they exist, and some people have feelings about that, but for the most part, it's just a fact of life.
Another great example of it is actually like with Ragna. I mean, I'm gonna keep talking about her because she's the best.
Ragna is so adorable.
When she's trying to investigate her feelings for Giselle and kind of understand what is socially acceptable in this world that she's now in compared to what she's used to, you know, she confides in Vanya and asks, how should I go about this? What does this mean? And it's not about like, it's not a discussion of queerness and about like, oh, the fact that she's having feelings for a woman. It's more so about like, hey, this is a safe space. How do I move forward if I'm just attracted to anyone? If I'm attracted to this person, how do I? And I just found that really lovely because that's the thing, is it's not that the queerness is the focus. It's just that it exists.
It's how do I navigate this? So two of my favorite things about that entire interaction is that Vanya is a little bit uncomfortable through that entire interaction, but it is because she is demisexual and she's like, I don't talk about this stuff.
Yeah, she's like, I'm not the one to ask.
and the way that Jonisa, who we haven't mentioned yet, but she is one of the characters. Jonisa just steps in and goes, "You're not giving relationship advice. Absolutely not." And that's how we facilitate that discussion. That is just like the character dynamics in this book are so just perfect. Like these are the character dynamics that everyone wants. Right.
And all of them are consistent. I think that a lot of us can agree that the characters and their decisions, the way their thought processes are very consistent and very like we know these characters through and through. And so whenever they take an action, I don't think there was ever a time where I was like, oh, that's out of character. Like that's weird of you to react this way or to say that. I feel like it's very consistent.
Yeah. To Neil, I got this. I stumbled on Mercedes Lackey's Voldemort when I was a young teen, and it really shaped my view of the world because it's a queer normative world. There we go, queer normative in the 80s and 90s. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's why my mom stopped reading Mercedes Lackey because I've known this about Mercedes Lackey for a long time, and now I prefer that from books in the world, and that like that's just the. I agree there that's the way that it should be. I also like the talks of consent too were really appreciated, especially for young adult readers. I love that she comes at this from two different angles because we have talking about it in regards to Ragna and being like, well, sometimes if you feel that way, you know, like you have to kind of like talking about how to navigate that. But we also do get to see and I think that especially for a lot of girls that were raised in very conservative households and really identified with some of, not just girls, but primarily girls that really identify with Vanya's feelings when it comes to authority and parental stuff. A lot of girls have this experience of having either a close call or having actual assault because their family did not prepare them for it. Right. And I think I like how Margaret Owen was able to come at it from these two different angles where we're talking about someone where it's like there's no trauma or past there, but also to kind of reiterate that like just because like also this is how am I trying to say like come at it from the angle of people who have never had this happen to them and are learning what consent is, and also people who have had that consent violated. And are able to like give them a way to process that through Vanya. So, yeah. Oh, yeah. This is important too. Also, Vanya telling Ragna that Giselle may not want people to know her business, not through queerness being something to be ashamed of, but that each person's journey is personal. I really appreciate it. Yeah. There's just so many like little touches that Margaret Owen puts in there that I don't think authors always think about. It's the little details.
Oh, for sure. Especially when we're getting around this idea too of like control is a really big theme in this book. And feeling as though you don't have the space to get away from whether it be your oppressors or your abusers.
Yeah.
kind of like tolerating the abuser. Like there are so many moments where, like for instance, the maids say, we always move in groups of 2. Like you're never meant to be alone. That's adjusting to a horrific thing rather than obviously like calling it out and preventing it from ever happening. So yeah, or acknowledge. Yes, exactly. Like just being like, hey, he is in control. He has more power than us. There's nothing that we can do beyond try to, I guess, like adjust our behavior and what we're doing, which is pretty much like what we teach us again, like regarding young women.
Yeah.
On how to protect themselves. Or what's something that I didn't address because we were still kind of like in the spoiler-free zone, but the fact that our main character Vanja, initially her role when joining Giselle at the palace was to act as a buffer, as someone that Idlebrecht could take advantage of to protect Giselle. And that's something that Giselle needs to learn. That's what I mean by growth as well for her, is that she didn't even acknowledge what she was asking of Vanja, what she was forcing Vanja to do to protect herself and survive, not really thinking about the horrible thing in position that she was putting Vanja in.
To be fair, I don't think that that Giselle actually knew what was what was being asked of Vanja, because if you read it in the narrative, it's very clear that Giselle's pretty innocent when this happens, despite some of the stuff. It's one of those things where she's not innocent to the abuse that Vanja is suffering from her parents. Like she does see that. She is not ignorant to that, and she bears full responsibility for not sticking up for Vanja, even though she was a child, so there's only so much that she could have done. But she definitely could have been a better ally and a better friend to Vanja. But she's also, because she is a noble girl, she was very sheltered. There's a high chance that she went into that marriage not knowing what the wedding night was supposed to be at all, because that was very, very common at the time for noble girls, because they would not be told. It really depends on which society you're in, because there are some medieval societies that had a really good, and especially earlier, they were really great about talking through both boys and girls how sex works. But it always was done on the wedding night, which she hasn't had her wedding night yet. So I kind of got the impression that Giselle does not understand the position that Vanja is being put in. It's Giselle's mother who understands and puts Vanja in that situation. Giselle just knows that she does not want to have sex with a man, and she's going to be miserable. Right? Because there's a comment that Abs has just added, and that's the scene I was thinking of, where when there's about to be the switch, where Vanja is going to take the pearls for herself and leave Giselle. Where Giselle says, "Oh, perfect, yes, you can take my place for anything I don't want to do." Yes.
And I think that there's the kind of suggestion where it could also include being in his bed or something. Like I feel as though there was, it wasn't directly mentioned,
outright implied, like
where like obviously Vanja would be having to do the horrible things, and Giselle, definitely part of her naivety, part of her youth, and like not, and also her being sheltered, and obviously seeing that Vanja often has protected her, done things for her in the past. But there was something there where I was like, Giselle knows some things. She may not have known everything though.
And again, it is specifically linked to her sexuality in that way, because she's like, I can't marry him, Vanja. I don't love him. I don't think I can. And then when Vanja says, okay, I'll do it, I'll take the pearls, she says, oh, Vanja, you're brilliant. You can take my place when I need you to, like at a ball or with the Margrave. I'm sure you can. And then it gets caught up because Vanja interrupts her. So it is blatantly like Giselle going, oh, I'm a lesbian, but you're not. I know you like boys, so you can do this.
So easy, perfect. And that is, again, this like, it more so just demonstrates that Vanja is not the only one who has like unknowingly, or like at least like kind of been a bit selfish, not thinking about how their actions or choices can impact others in a horrible way.
Ooh, this is a good one. Even Giselle wasn't thinking about sex. She assumed Vanja would never have a life for herself and would only ever serve Giselle. That is that is such a true statement. And I like, especially, I feel like that is a lot of, because Giselle is at that point where she's just now starting to realize that other people have wants and desires. And because her entire life has kind of revolved around her, she is behind the curve on that, right? That is a consistent thing that you see with kids when they are in more privileged positions, that it takes them a little bit longer to be like, oh, the world doesn't revolve around me.
And really, it's not even her. Like, she's lived for her parents for so long too. So we have to admit, like, acknowledge that she hasn't fully been like selfish and like, she's been pampered, she's been privileged, but she's also being controlled by her parents and being forced to marry a man that she doesn't want to be with. You know, there's that's what shows how many layers there are, where everyone at every kind of tier in this book are being forced into things and having to make certain choices to, again, survive. Like, for Giselle, in the world she was in, that was her version of survival. Whereas like Vanya's is far more extreme because she's got far more to try to survive. Yeah, it's interesting.
And she also was in a very common, like, Giselle's mom's kind of attitude of, you do it because you have to, because that's how you survive, really does speak on the role of that many women play in society. Because it's only been the last, let me do some quick 50 or so years that women have been able to easily be independent of a man. When you're looking, especially, again, we're looking at the medieval period. Yes, there were successful women who did their thing. A lot of them had a level of privilege in some way to set them up, because a lot of the time what you found through all the way up into the probably 50s and 60s is that women, it was very hard, like, especially in the higher echelons of society, you couldn't be independent. Women married out of necessity because they needed a way to make sure that they would be provided for, and there were not nearly as many options as we have. And we're looking at a society where the options are not great, especially for someone like Giselle, because she would be ostracized from like the entirety of the society that she knows if she went to get a job.
Yeah, totally.
Like, they were looking into society where there were only two like actual professions for, and I say actual, there were other professions, but people typically, it was serving or it was being a sex worker, and that was really looked down on. But Tennille says there are a lot of modern societies that are that way too, sadly, girls not knowing and put a disadvantage last word. In general, we do not educate kids enough about what consent looks like, about what assault looks like. I remember my education as a kid, and I probably had better education than many that grew up like I did, was that if someone touches you in a way that you don't like, let us know. My little brain goes, or no, it was if they touch you in a bad way. My little brain goes, okay, but what's a bad way?
Yeah. And what if the person who is doing this to you is telling you it's not bad? Then, you know, like, you're being told by society what is bad and what is good, even if you dislike it, you know, like, that doesn't mean it's, you know, it's all semantics and language. And that's why they say, like, you need to speak openly about this, like, make sure, like, speak about anatomy, use the real terms, have all of this stuff, and moving forward. But yeah, possibly to switch gears a little bit, even though there may be comments that we need to address beforehand. So let's do that. And then I'll bring up my next topic that I want to talk about.
Okay, perfect. This reminded me, like, I do like how, like, this book does highlight how girls are pitted against each other in the way that they, like, does a really good job of that. And we may talk about that more, but I work with a lot of international people, and there are many, many countries where girls don't have rights to stand up for themselves or be independent. And the people that I meet are definitely privileged in their society if they make it to an international university. It is very hard, because society is so good at not just covering things up, but turning us against each other. You see it consistently in the news when I'm not going to name names because I don't want to wade into that drama. That's not what this is about. But you consistently see when women speak up in the news about sexual harassment, about for a popular male figure, the amount of women that need to speak up in order for it to be taken seriously. And the number of times, if there's not a the number of times you will see that the people who are actually discrediting the victims the most are women. So often, because we are taught that if we, again, going back to Vanja being like, if I do this right, I'm good, if I, make sure that I do this the right way, if I do this, we'll be protected. And if we don't, we're not worthy of protection. Whereas that protection should be inherent in the fact that we exist and are people.
Right. And honestly, that's a good kind of like entrance into like Vanya's character as someone who can't be trusted, who can't change. Right. This idea that like a tiger can't change its stripes kind of situation. And so constantly Vanya is fighting against this like fight or flight panic mode, right? Like there are multiple times throughout this book where suddenly everyone's heads almost like turn on her and she's like and she starts to panic and feel like, and that's a trauma response obviously from her past experiences too, which we can get into. But like the one scene that I was thinking about especially that is like it still moves me today and I'm just like, oh, like my heart goes out to Vanya, where she seems like things are suddenly like turning for good. Like she's finally opening up, feeling like she can trust people. Emmerich and her have like made some strides. She's finally going to show him that she didn't burn the notebook with all these notes. She goes to the prefect's offices and that's where like everything just falls apart. We end up learning that his mentor has been murdered and obviously there's certain signs on the body, how he died, that is suggesting that Vanya did it in his mind. And he just immediately turns on her and is in pursuit and she's running. And when she ends up again, like, so that's done. She thought she could trust him. She's running off. She goes to Giselle and Janiza and there to try to like get some type of refuge. And then Emmerich's there and they turn on her too. And she's just in this moment where like she breaks down because she sees that can I change or will these people trust me again? Or am I always going to, and my heart went out to her so much during that.
Is in my opinion, the biggest turning point in the book, because we see Vanya, so much of Vanya's character and why she does what she does is rooted in, that scene. This is consistently one of my favorite scenes. As much as I love Emmerich, he's not in the right in this scene.
No.
My computer's trying to get me to restart. I forgot how bad that scene hurt me so badly. Like, so I grew up in a environment where I wasn't encouraged to stand up to authority. I was encouraged, and I don't think it was anything malicious on my parents' part. It's just that they were taught that abject obedience. And I've had conversations with my mom about this. It is, I so deeply recognize that moment with Vanya, because anytime that I have to stand up for myself internally, that is how, like, I know the feeling that she's feeling in that moment. Because like I've had confrontations where like I'm barely not shaking. And it's because Vanya is also in a similar situation where she had to keep her head down and do what she was told, and obedience was expected of her. And so she has been put in this position where she knows the only person, there's a quote somewhere that she's like, the only person that's looking out for her is her. And she knows that. And that is such a turning point, because that is the first time that someone else stands up for her. Up to this point, she has only had herself to stand up, to stand up for herself. And Ragna comes in and stands up for her. And I think that is such a turning point, not only for her, like having someone do that, but also for the other characters, realizing that it is not that she is untrustworthy, it's that she does not feel she can trust them. And they realize that they are not worthy of her. If they are not worthy of her trust, how can they expect her to trust them?
It also speaks to why she views society and lies, because she's like, when I tell the truth, they don't believe me. So why should I tell the truth? Why don't I just be the villain that they want me to be? Because at least we're at the same point and I'm not frustrated that I'm just like shouting into the void and no one's believing me. So fine, I'll be the villain. I'll be the thief. I'll be the liar, because you guys won't believe me when I'm telling the truth anyway. Like I get that.
What I do doesn't matter, so I might as well do what I want, basically, is what she gets. People of privilege are more likely to believe that their goodness is due to nature versus nurture, so they can say to themselves that people in unfortunate situations deserve it. That's the guiding philosophy behind the United States of America, guys. Literally don't get me started. But yeah, that is consistently one of my favorite things about the book, as someone who can still, even as an adult, like fantasizes about people standing up to certain people in my life when they try to make me feel like I'm less than. Standing up, like I fantasize about having someone say, "No, you're wrong. Margaret is right," and like making them ashamed. That's never going to happen. I would love for that to happen, to have that moment in my life, but it's not going to. And it's
and you know, even like Vanya has those moments too, though, where she like she also like has that kind of anxiety, of fear of, but then there are moments where she does stand up for herself and she thinks on her feet, and I'm just like, like even so again, Emmerich totally in the wrong. He ended up becoming a bit of a villain in that moment, and he is constantly trying to work to like appease that and fix it throughout the rest of the story. But there's this moment where he's like chasing her, and like he's like had witch ash, and he cuts himself, and she's trying to get away. She licks his hand, and he's just like, and they're both like, oh my God. And I think then like her parting words is piss off, and then he goes flying. And I was like, yes, Vanya. And I just think it shows the craziness that Margaret Owen can throw in so much emotion, but also moments of humor and action, and just it's this kind of crazy thing that she can pack such a punch from so many different angles in one scene.
Speaking of Emmerich and that whole situation, can we just say that boy has the most perfect apology in the history of stop it, Abs. Yes, she's me, but she's my friend and she is trying, and you're hurting her. I love her. Like, truly, like, I think Ragna is one of the few people that recognizes that Vanya has never actually had true friendship, despite what Giselle might say. There's a great story that it's like the princess would say that they were friends, but the maid would question if they ever were. But I love, number one, I love that apology, but I also love that like he is a boundary honoring king. Like he just is like, I'm like, even when he's like, you might fall into your death, when she says stop, he's like, okay, I'll stop. This is crazy, but I'll stop. And I love that about he's such a well-written boy. I love him.
Yeah, and it shows again, people can learn, they can make mistakes, or like they have to put in the effort to show that it's going to be a slow process, but they're willing to put in the work to basically regain your trust and show that they truly don't ever want to put you in that position again. You know?
And I think one thing that she did really well is we believe Emmerich in that moment, because him going after Vanya in the way he did was more out of character than him being on Vanya's side, because we have seen him consistently like trying to help and trying to be on Vanya's side. So I feel like, because sometimes in romance, like when you have a romance and something like that happens and then apologizes and everything is fine. Number one, everything isn't fine in this. They do have a little bit that they have to work through. We'll see more of that in book 2. Anyways, but I like that we have like a lot of the time they don't have the history of him consistently doing the right thing and saying the right thing and putting the actions behind his words, rather than this one moment where he really hurt her, being an outlier, and him recognizing that and being like, hey, listen, and making up for it. Yes, I love that. I love that he doesn't try to justify his actions. He just apologizes and genuinely feels awful.
Yeah. Oh gosh. And I think that's also the turning point. And that's why it's such a pivotal, like that horrible breakdown of their group, of Vanya kind of being the center of that group, because it's really Vanya that's bringing them all together too, by the way. So that breakdown and then the rebuilding, it makes them like this stronger force as well as because it's like, wait a second, the actual villain is Eidelbrecht, which we haven't even really addressed, is the Margrave, what he's secretly doing, and like all of the pieces that he's been putting together. Like that was really intense. He's a great villain, I'm not gonna lie.
He is such a perfect foil to Vanya, because he has similar reasoning to what he's doing, but we see how just like, because we've gone through this, because they're both doing the things they're doing because they believe that is how they need to survive. Vanya is coming from a position where she has no money, no wealth, no privilege. She is doing the best that she can. She's scraping together what she can to get into a position where she is safe. Albrecht has all of those things. And his concerns about, hey, they just want to get rid of me, I am a threat to the throne. That's backed up by history. Like, that is a historical thing that nobles had to worry about. But we see through him, he had all of the things he needed. Like she specifically calls him out. He had all of the things he needed to be able to escape his situation, whereas she had to work to get the resources to escape her situation. So like, it's such an interesting, there's such interesting foils of each other in that way.
Oh yeah. And I feel like I'm jumping around, but
no,
like
I jump around too.
Okay, because I was like, oh, connections. How do we talk about it? I mean, we've all read the book at this point. So like the court of the low gods, like that scene where we have truth, like the god of truth with all of their eyes, and they're kind of like the lie detector of the group. But every time they switch to his perspective and he like responds, truth had to grudgingly say he believes that it's true. Like it's So there's this kind of suggestion of like intention and like his version of true. You know what I mean? It's like somehow that still doesn't stop that he's still doing this horrible thing and all these. Yeah, it was an interesting like element to this story of his perspective being like, well, that's why you can't necessarily take everyone's word for it, because we all have a different truth that we're leaning towards. I don't know. Yeah.
It's also such an interesting kind of commentary on how someone who is in a privileged position can take one small concern that is actually valid and use that to turn themselves into a victim, right? Because he had like, it's so funny because he actually does have a victim mentality in what he's doing, because he's gone, oh, there is this, like my brothers died in these wars because they were threatened by us. Therefore, I am the true victim here. There is nothing, like, there's nothing wrong with the system. The only issue with it is that I am not at the top where I am, I can have the power and be the one calling the shots. It's so fascinating how like he is able to twist that around in his mind and see himself as the true victim, when really the victims are all of the people whose lives he's going to ruin in what he is doing. Right.
Yeah. And him justifying the horrible things he's done to get that end. He's like, oh, it's worth it to kill all of these people and like do all these horrific things, because then I will reach this point and I'm, of course, the best leader for the job, kind of thing.
He believes that he is the victim because the thing he has is not the one he thinks he's owed. That's a direct quote from the book, I do believe. Yes, exactly.
I love that Abs is coming with receipts.
Yes. And it is like, it's so interesting because he is in such a position of power. And if he truly was worried for his safety, like Vanja says, he could disappear. We were talking about Vanja having her own moral compass, but so does he. And the difference between him and Vanja is the things that she is doing. She is very specific on who she affects. Right? Because we see her time and time and time again go out of her way and potentially sometimes put herself in danger, or potentially like risk what she's doing to make sure that no one who is innocent, no one who is in a position similar to hers gets harmed. Right?
Yeah, I mean, even going back to, she saves Emmerich's life when he's after her, right? Like way at the beginning of the story, when the Nachtmarin is first trying to get him, she doesn't know this. She just sees death reaching out for him. And she's like, no, don't kill him for me. So she saves him, even when he's obviously after her and like her current enemy. And so she is like willing to acknowledge that there are certain lines that like certain people who don't deserve a type of punishment or harm towards them, unless like in her mind that they're deserving of it, even if they're like not helping her, which is extra funny because we do know that like I think the day before she was fully willing to let him drown. Yeah, she's like, put him in the river. And it's like Ragna who misunderstood. She was like, oh, get his bag. Oh yes, his bag and he are now safe. No, I just wanted you to save the bag.
I didn't care what happened. I think that is on her part like a thing where she's like, well, if he can't swim, I'm not the one that killed him.
Yeah,
right?
like that's his fault.
Whereas if death had killed him, number one, she would be beholden to death. We haven't talked about that. We need to talk about that. She would be beholden to death. But also she's like, that's a little bit too far. Willful ignorance is still ignorance, but should it be treated the same? He believes he's justified because he ignores all options that aren't his ideal resolution. I don't know that I would call his particular brand of ignorance to Neil, because I think that it is from I guess they're in both cases, they're from a selfish place, but I don't think he's ignorant. I think he just does not care. Whereas I do understand willful ignorance from a perspective of, if I examine this too closely, if I look at, specifically when we're talking about privilege, I think the reason a lot of people, I'm going to just, coming from my own space, talk about white privilege. I think a lot of the reason that a lot of people are not willing to examine white privilege the way that they should, people like my parents, is because if they start to examine things, they have to look at how they are complicit, and then they have to go, oh, am I the bad guy? And no one wants to feel that. I don't think Albrecht cares about whether or not he is the bad guy. He just doesn't. It's not that he's ignorant. He just doesn't care. I think willful ignorance is knowing that there is something that you should look into and not looking into it because you are afraid of what you will find out and what it will make you examine about yourself.
I'm wondering if it's more like willful antipathy, like the choice not to have sympathy or empathy, to like remove that from the situation. Because he like truly, like, especially when we're discussing, the separation of like classes, like this is like classism is going on, privilege is going on. People deserve what they've been given in life, because as if there's a choice in all options of how you survive. And that's, I think, like, not being able to be empathetic and understanding where this person is coming from, why their life turned out the way it did. And he's like, no, I refuse to acknowledge or care. I specifically refuse to care about how these people's lives ended up the way they were, because it doesn't at all align with what I need the world
truly
to look
narcissism. Like. It is truly narcissism, where he's going, the only person that matters is me, and me getting what I want. Like, even we see with like Irmgard, who is the person that he supposedly loves. Like, he doesn't actually care about her. No, he doesn't care about her. He doesn't care how she feels. She is only useful to him in so much. Like, I don't think she understands. Like, it's so funny because I was reading it this time thinking about, well, like, she doesn't understand that eventually, if he is willing to kill Giselle because Giselle is inconvenient, eventually when she pisses him off, she is going to become the victim. Right? Because he is like, he's putting up with it now. But she's eventually going to become the victim, because eventually she will do something that pisses him off and he will turn on her. Like, that's just how these kinds of people work.
Yeah, exactly. Did you want to switch to this discussion of fortune and death? Because
yes,
like,
let's talk about, oh my God, and the low gods and all of that stuff. I feel like there are certain things that you and I cannot talk about this because it will be spoilers for the next book. But I just love the magic system of this book, and the way that we have fortune and death. And specifically, like, the way it examines how parents can have the best of intentions and still be wrong.
Yeah.
I love that. Like, just like, because there's no doubt in my mind that fortune and death, in the way that they can as low gods, love Vanya. They also put her in a very hard position.
I think there's a moment at the end when they are addressing the tangled like relationship that they have, and it's Vanya's 17th birthday. So like in this world, she is officially like, able to gain her own agency, and that ends up being a loophole for their like, understanding of, hey, you are our ward. We like need you to decide between one of us, and they acted on that position as gods. And so when they come to her 4 years later and say, we made that agreement or that offer to you as gods, so we like, unfortunately now need to abide by it. And then there's the realization that she's 17, and so they don't have to. And I think it might be Fortune who says at one point, we are good at being gods, but we were bad mothers, or something like that. Like, we performed as good guardians to you, but terrible mothers, something like that.
So let's say I Death is such a character too. Like she very like anyways, Death says gods can't be wrong, but mothers can.
That's what it is. Yes. God
That's yeah,
can't be wrong, but mother can.
I literally just looked this up. I love that you kind of see that Death saw this coming, although Fortune didn't. Let's see. Fortune lays a hand on my cheek. As gods, we can no longer shake the world to keep you safe, but if you need us, we will come to you as your mothers, and you will always see our hands at work. We may nudge things for you here and there. You are, after all, our daughter. I loved like how it explores the fact that she said, I didn't want to be your servant. I wanted to be your daughter, and how eventually they are able to come to that.
Yeah. Or even before that too, when it's after the fire from that one, like Grimling, I think it was, and they end up seeking refuge at the, like at Fortune's temple or, like sanctuary. And Fortune's like, oh, she chose me. She asked for help. And Vanya says, no, I am your daughter. This is my home, and I have a right to get sanctuary here. And I love the progression of also Vanya gaining more presence and like grounding of her arguing, like, because before I think this was like a silent miscommunication where like she never openly told them how she wanted them to treat her, and they didn't know what they were doing, because like also this idea of like being new parents, them not knowing how like they're not, so
they've never done this before.
Yeah. And so she needs to learn to also set her expectations for them. It doesn't matter that they are her parents, but she's like, I have boundaries. I have expectations for you too. I'm allowed to ask things of you just as much as you have, like entering this relationship, and her standing her ground. And I love that. I really appreciate her relationship with them.
Going back to the crowd favorite, I love that Ragna plays a part in that, because for the first time she has Ragna to ask about Ragna's relationship with her own mother, getting back to Isvald, because she had just assumed that this is how gods are, and that there was no other choice because that's who her mothers were. And then Ragna's like, well, no, she's my mom. Like, she's weird. She's not great, but she is my mom. And her help doesn't come with a cost.
Even that's relatable, because in our, like, as we're growing up, our only frame of reference for our relationship with family, with parents, is our own home. And it's almost, it's really hard for you to like learn that your home dynamic isn't the same as everyone else is. It's kind of like this crazy realization that we have, and loss of innocence as we're kind of getting older.
Yeah, now that is actually linked directly to how society in the global north is kind of structured, because up until recently, you didn't have these nuclear families where it's mom, dad, and the kids. You had families being a lot more involved. So if, for example, the parents aren't able or there's a lot more support for the children, and they have a lot more to contrast it. And that's not saying that cycles of abuse don't exist outside of the more, I guess you would say, Western nuclear family. It's just that they look different, and that the kids are more likely to have outside support and someone kind of keeping an eye on things when you have more people. It's a very specific, like, I think especially American thing, where we've got kids so isolated from others. When Vanya asked Ragna if her mother treated her the same, and Ragna says, no, why would she? She loves me. I know. Tennille says, people often mean well, parents often mean well, but are not infallible. Mine tried to set me up when I was a teen with a guy who abused his girlfriends terribly. No, thank you. They just saw him as a nice young man. God, that gets into like how bad we are at recognizing red flags in young men.
Yeah. Like, this also speaks to like Fortune and Death. There was a time, like, it got to a point where Vanya couldn't stay in their world, and so they placed her in like Giselle's home, and obviously we're assuming, and they unknowingly kind of like led to her gaining abuse and having this, like, it's this domino effect for sure.
Yeah, and it was one of those things. They were thinking about her, and I think this is something that we are seeing challenged specifically by our generation. But they were thinking of her in that she needs a roof over her head. She needs someone who will feed her. They didn't look into, are they abusing her? Like, how are they going to treat her? Are they going to make sure that she is not just fed and clothed and has a roof over her head? Are they going to make sure that she is thriving? There's a difference between thriving and surviving.
Yeah, exactly.
So, this is a very light example, but my family's birthdays always land on the same day of the week every year, all Mondays, for example. I was shocked when I realized that wasn't automatic for families.
You're like, of course. What day of the week are all of your family born? That's so funny. That's actually really interesting.
That's
crazy.
funny. That does make it easier though to remember what birthdays there are. That's hilarious. Okay, let me see if there's anything else we wanted to talk about.
As you're thinking, I can ask people how they felt about repetition, or at least unassuming repetition, how important, because like I think that the scene that culminates like everything is obviously the battle against Idlebrecht, and them finally facing off, and then obviously the courts of the low gods. But we have the finding the lady. We get so many scenes of that, and then in the end we see it orchestrated where they're getting distracted by the wedding, the two Idlebrechts, and she's like, perfect, their eyes are on them, so I can escape and get away. That is like a perfect example of that. Even the repetitive elements of like Ragna being able to morph into different, different creatures. She can become like a young woman, and we then see her as Idlebrecht. That is something that's suddenly like, oh, why didn't I consider that she could do that?
Well, I think,
and even oh yeah, go ahead.
That's part of why it was important to have her be a servant earlier in the book.
Mm-hmm.
So that like that, I feel like that might fall into kind of like how the magic works. But I love the idea of like the thing that makes the repetition in this book work so well is that it is a single element that is repeating, right? When we're talking about find the lady, it's different every time. The way that she is using it is different every time. Right,
it's the same idea, but it's coming from a different it's perspective. It's being like used through a different image. Also even like the white penny and the red penny, or how she like always is trying to steal stuff from Emmerich, and like sleight of hand, and like that became so important in the end, because as she's turning into gems and they're like holding hands, and she does a sleight of hand where he thinks he's holding his prefect coin. And instead, when he opens his hand, he has a red penny. And and so I was like, oh my gosh, it's all coming together.
I love how that scene is like shows how selfless she can, how she can be both, how selflessness can sometimes be very pragmatic, because she was like, I'm not going to survive this anyways. It should be me. And that's what her thinking is. Let's see. I don't know if I would call it repetition, more like a callback. Mistborn has repetition, but this is new ways to use the same concept. I mean, there are multiple different ways I think that you can use repetition when he puts everything back at the same time. Every freaking
and she's like, why did you just do this again? And he's like, I'm getting so frustrated. I would say a callback is a type of repetition, Tennille.
Yes.
I would like to hear your response to that. I think that's a version. There's types of repetition where it's like you're just using the same phrase over and over again. You're using the same tone over and over again. Callbacks, I think, are a type of repetition.
I think we're running into, these are two different, repetition and callbacks are two different things, but they can also overlap, right? Because callbacks can be a type of repetition, but there are multiple ways that you can do a callback to something that happened previously. Easter eggs are another good thing that like you'll see as callbacks, like previous movies or previous books, things like that. I think that there are specific parts of this book where it is very intentional, and I think she uses a lot of phrases that are repetitive. You could consider Vanya continually having these ridiculous descriptions of Emmerich as a type of repetition. We haven't talked about how effortlessly funny this book is. It is just so delightful. Like going back to like Emmerich putting things back in the same pocket all the time. Like the humor in this book is unmatched.
Or like, again, or Ragna's the best. When they're in the orphanage and he's created a system to not talk about like murder and like, so he calls like the Margrave the baker and like to kill his hug. And Ragnar comes in, who is trying to hug the Giselle? And he's like, trying to hug the Giselle to death. And they're like, who's trying to die? All right, time for bed. Everyone like I love it so much.
Yeah. I will say, I want to go back. I will say Mistborn, speaking specifically of the repetition in Mistborn as someone who's read the first, oh my God, that really does get repetitive and like in a bad way. I don't know, like, I think he does it better in the second era, but like there is repetition that can, like, it is a really interesting foil against this book because the repetition in Mistborn is a lot out of necessity. And I don't think it is as creative as when Margaret Owen is trying to, like, she's trying to bring themes back. Whereas with Mistborn, it's, I push this metal, I pull that metal, I do this, I do that. And it's, I don't know how you get around it, but it just is also like,
yeah, it could be dependent on the author's intentions. Like, why are they repeating this? I think repetition can be a criticism, especially if it feels as though the author isn't trusting you to remember all the information. Just like reminding you of important facts, where I don't think Margaret Owen is ever doing that. I don't think she's ever repeating something to remind us that this event happened.
Yeah, how Emmerich is always correcting people saying he is a junior prefect. And it's one of, like, I feel like, because it's a joke that they've set up, and then the way that she will place that and it lightens, like she uses that humor to lighten the mood in ways. It could just be because I've had recent conversations about Mistborn involving repetition of story elements and that they were the same things said too many times. So that's what I'm associating. Direct repetition versus repetition of variations. My brain is not coming up with the right word. It's just feeding me word isomers. You're exactly right, though, because I think there is a difference between repetition that happens unintentionally because it is a part of the story, or it is a thing that and I'm not going to knock any authors for this, because there are certain elements that I think there are authors like to have in their books and enjoy having in their books. But you do have to be careful about it, that because you can have repetition without it being repetitive for the audience.
I think it speaks to the fact that like most statements surrounding a book, I think depending on what you're saying, can be either negative or positive depending on how you're reacting to it. Like, I've read books that I found repetitive, and I find that to be a criticism. I've also read books where I found, elements repetitive in a way that I like. And so it's a positive thing. Same with like, oh, this book was like too fast paced for me. Or I loved how fast paced it was because I was like flipping through it and binging it. I think it's interesting to kind of consider this. And I think that the repetition in this book, how it's done, why it's done, and as Tennille had said, the repetition repetition via variation, right? So we're getting the same scenes but slightly different, so it still feels fresh. That shows how repetition can be described in a positive light. And then there are some where you're just like, oh God, this is repetitive.
I'm going to say something in a minute, but I just want to, if there is anything that you guys want our thoughts on, now is the time to drop that in the chat really quick, because we'll probably be wrapping up here in a little bit. Number one, because I'm going to have to pee soon. But like, I think going to what you're saying, repetition is a valid story technique, and when it's used well, like it's used here, it can be really, really impactful. And I think that is one of those things that like authors tend to have, like, it is a pitfall for a lot of authors where they don't recognize the repetition, and you can tell the intentionality in so much of what Margaret Owen did with this book, right? Like, there is so much of this book that is very, very intentional. And the way that everything, like, going right down, we're going to go back to Isvald and the curse, going right down to the thing that starts this in the first place, where Isvald cursed her not because she stole shit, but because Isvald knew she knew that because Adalbrecht was encroaching on her territory, and she knew Vanja was the one that would be able to get stuff done. Just the way, like, Margaret Owen did not waste a single thing in this book, and the way that she is able to bring things right back around and go, well, actually, and I love how she lets us and Vanja come to that conclusion before it happens. Like she's not we're not being spoon fed. We're being given the stuff to put things together on our own. I think that's what makes a good heist.
Giselle's horse suddenly coming in and being so important.
That is a callback to the original fairy tale, actually. Yeah, no, hold on. So in the original fairy tale, the princess had a talking horse named Falada, which is the name in the book. And when the serving girl gets to the castle, she has the horse's head cut off because she is afraid the horse will say how she treated her mistress. I'm like, you're not worried about that she'll like out you as a servant and having taken your mistress to play. You're just worried about how them talking about. And so the princess, she bribes the what's called the knacker. They're the people that would have disposed of horses. They were the ones that made glue. She bribes the knacker to hang the horse's head on an archway so that she's able to see her horse again. And so there is a specific rhyme that, hold on, I'm just going to go grab it.
Okay. This is wild. You know, I'm so glad we're having this discussion because it shows how much more layers
there is.
It's so
funny because them calling up the horse is essential to them being able to put this case against Adelbrecht. But okay, there we go. So when they're because she's the goose girl, she's driving geese out. She will say as she passes under her horse's skull, she goes, "Alas, Falada, hanging there." And Falada answered, "Alas, young queen, how ill you fare. If this your tender mother knew, her heart would surely break in two." And that is part of how they figure out that she is actually the princess.
That's why the horse rhymes too?
Yeah. Oh my God.
What?
That makes so much sense. I need to put that together.
I'm obsessed. That's amazing.
Yeah, I love it. Falada is key. A sorceress comes to call as well. Enjoyed this. I need to read that one. That one sounds really, really good. Let's see. Gods as the ultimate beings of privilege, so high above things and distance from the realities of lesser beings that they don't question using humans to their own ends. I find that so, like, I think that that's such an interesting. One of the things I like about the gods here is that they are beings of incredible power, but they are also so human. Hey there, Rainy. Welcome. They are also they're so powerful, but they're also so human. Like they are not perfect. Even though her godmothers say that they are infallible, they are not.
And even the gods are restrained either by their own roles and rules, what they say. Because like, again, going back to Death and Fortune saying, we made this declaration 4 years ago and now we need to abide by it. You know, like not that they want to, but they now have to. It's law. And Icewald similarly being like, I've cursed you. Now we've got to abide by this. And like having like, because Icewald can't simply go against Adelbrecht on their own. Like they had to do it this way. You know, so gods are crazy. They're a crazy concept.
In the way that God used that a God used. Icewald's very much used Vanya in the way that Giselle did. And I feel like, I don't know. I think like I didn't question that as much as I questioned Giselle using her because they're both like, I feel like a lot of the time you hold gods to a different standard in fiction and in real life than you hold people to.
Yeah, well, because I think we don't expect gods to have a moral compass in the same way. Like again, going back to being morally gray and having their own compasses, each god kind of has, especially in this world, has their own compass as to what their purpose, dependent on what their purpose is. Like Icewald's purpose is to protect her forest. And so what she does is in service. So she would say she is doing good and doing well in cursing Vanya. But would Vanya say that? No, probably not. Although she makes out pretty well at the end. Yeah, this is just such a good book. And also, I mean, this is a very brief thing just to highlight the amazing cover and how many like nods there are to like different elements. I mean, we have the gems, we have the pearls on her neck, we've got the two gods, we've got the skull. Yes.
Did you know that this is a bear skull? I thought it was a deer skull because of the antlers, but it is apparently, I've looked up what a bear skull looks like. This is a bear skull.
Yeah, and it's just like I'm really impressed with that. And even look at this. There's a horseshoe right there.
There is a horseshoe. You have the
then a
crown.
crown.
This is not the version that I thought it was.
Yeah.
I was
And
about to
so
add
then
the
speaking
straight
of,
edges. Yes.
now we'll be going into Painted Devils, and you know for a fact that this cover is going to have some nods
Cover
too, but
has
we
some
won't say
Easter eggs
anything.
on it. I feel like this is Easter egging done well, by the way,
Yeah.
because like it doesn't really give away anything. You're not going
No.
to know what all of this means. We even have like the moon up there. You're not going to know what all of this means. You're not going to know what the Painted Devils cover means until you have read it. Like I remember, I don't know if I did this with Little Thieves, but I remember when I read Painted Devils, I kept looking to the front of the cover to see it. But speaking of Painted Devils, I think let's wind down a little bit. If you are joining us for the read along, that is the next one. Mine is currently behind 75 different things. So thank you for being prepared, Leandra.
I'm happy to be.
So I would like to applaud Margaret Owen for making her covers increasingly more purple.
Oh, yeah, she's working her way in
that one's one shade of purple, and the next one is a completely different purple. Two of my favorite funny quotes, obviously said by Ragna, where I am the Vanya. I take things and I am mean for no reason. And also, why would someone pay her to kiss a sausage?
Yes. Oh, gosh, it's just too good.
Listen, I have an entire tab for humor, but we are going to be reading Painted Devils next. That's the next book in the series. This is also a reread for both of us. Oh, one thing we didn't get into was our first. What were your feelings the first time you read this? I just want to know. I know we've talked about this a little bit, but
oh my gosh, I think I was so overwhelmed and enamored. I remember I read it in I think like 4 or 5 days, which was really quick because I only had the physical copy, and I didn't realize that. I felt like I didn't realize literature could be this layered. I felt as though again, realizing how fantasy, I was like, okay, I guess I get the hype of why people love fantasy. Like I understand.
Oh, I'm so happy.
And I was lucky because I had Painted Devils immediately after because this had just come out that summer. So
to be honest, I feel like you still got the worst weight.
I know, because I literally read both of these in the same month. So I was like, boom, done. Okay, when's this book coming out? And then now it's finally coming out.
I feel like the wait between Little Thieves and Painted Devils for me, I only had to wait a year. But like Little Thief ends, you're excited, you're having a good time, and you're just excited for whatever happens next for these characters. Painted Devils, guys, I'll warn you now, it ends and you're suffering. It's just suffering from here on out.
Oh my gosh. But you know what's crazy is the tone and everything else matches. The consistency.
They match so beautifully.
Yeah. Like even the opening, I can't wait for you all to read like the opening scene because it's hilarious and it's so good.
Yes, you are welcome, both of you. Anyways, we are picking that up. I believe, I don't know if you, this is Leandra's plan, but I am planning on starting Painted Devils. It is next weekend on the 8th. I believe it's 5 p.m., right? I was going to check this before we did. It was 5 p.m. Eastern time that we will be doing sprints on my channel on the 8th, and then we'll be doing sprints on Leandra's channel on the 9th. And we're both planning, I'm planning on starting Painted Devils then. So
I'll be sure to do the same.
Yeah, it's really fun to like start it together and be talking about the same things and not have to worry about spoiling things as much. But we will be doing the sprints then, and then I believe we are still figuring out the date for the live show. So we'll let you guys know as soon as we know what day the live show is going to be. And is there anything real quick? Do you have anything on your channel you'd like to plug before we head out?
Well, nothing too crazy. This past Thursday, I had a relax and readathon of vlogs.
Yes,
coziness.
You need to watch this.
Yeah, it was really it was exactly what I needed after being sick. And then tomorrow I have my TBR coming out, and it's in honor of Realmathon because that's going on in March too. So if you guys needed a readathon, I mean, there's a million going on in March, but I also understand if people need a break because it's
I know it's. I always participate in Ramadan just because I enjoy the kind of the theme. I haven't filmed my TBR for it yet, but that's for tomorrow.
That's fine.
That was one of those things where I was like, my TBR for it will be going up next week. That was one of those things where like I was going to be getting my hair done yesterday, and I was like, I'm just gonna wait to film until my hair is nice. That's what I'm getting. We're so close. Well. We're so close. Speaking of fantasy, if you end up liking The Hexologist, I'm currently reading something that has a similar vibe, what was like Blood Over Brighthaven. I have this author's first book on my TBR for next month, which is The Sword of Kaigen. So I definitely want to read this at some point. But
yeah, I've had my eye on both of those titles. So Tennille, we'll let you know.
Exciting. Anyways, Leandra, if you guys are just now hearing of the Little Thieves Read Along, this is probably something I should have plugged at the beginning, but both of our announcement videos will be linked down below, as well as Leandra's channel is linked down below. If you have not checked Leandra out yet, you should, because she's really cool and also has fantastic taste in sweaters.
Oh, thank you so much. This was a Christmas gift from my parents. So yeah, I had to rock it today.
It's giving me Elsa vibes, to be fair.
You know what? I'll take it. I'll take that. Speaking of Ace and Demi Rep, even though supposedly the new movie has her maybe having a love interest or something like that, she'll always be Ace in my mind.
Yeah. Listen, we can headcanon characters the way we want to headcanon them. But thank you guys for joining us. We will be chatting about Penny Devils very soon. And I hope everyone is enjoying this book. If you are joining after the fact, please let us know in the description what you thought of, not in the description, that's mine. In
below
the comments, go further down. Let us know in the comments how you felt about this book. We would love to know your thoughts. And the only invalid thoughts are mean thoughts about Vanja.
We won't accept it.
No one's allowed to have mean thoughts about Vanja. We will hunt you down. No, I'm kidding. We won't hunt you down, but I might not speak to you.
we won't acknowledge it.
Thank you so much for joining, and I will see you later when we will talk about
Got it. Good to know. Yeah, being like, okay, so that's your challenge. Try to hack Margaret's
account. Please don't, but that's hilarious. I will see you all later, but we will talk about more wordy, dirty things. Bye.